So welcome everybody. It's great to have you with us. I am going to put on my screen at some point very soon. Well, I've got about 60 million screens around me that I'm trying to manage between, so I will be there in a second. So it's great to have you with us, guys. I think we've listened to some brilliant stories today. I'd love to do this all day, every day, to be honest, to listen to these kind of inspiring stories. And today, at this point, we've got an opportunity maybe to listen to you guys, auditors, consultants, trainers, authors, speakers, and a chance to provide your thoughts on all that. So welcome. And we're gonna kick straight in without even a smile or a how do you do.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you, David.
Yeah, well, I'll put mine on now, actually. Yeah, I will put mine on. First question, guys. We talked a lot about best practice, and I think things are changing so quickly these days when we talk about new technologies and how we're using those, and looking backwards to good practice and best practice. But let's open with those two words, best practice. What on earth in 2021 is best practice? Barclay.
Okay, thank you. If I can start on that. It's an interesting one because it does come up in quite a lot of discussions as to what best practice really is. For years, it's been sort of held aloft as, yes, best practice is the thing to do. We must follow best practice. And I think a lot of that has got quite blurred now, and we need to just look at it from the point of view of best practice is a number of things. It's a toolbox rather than a Swiss Army knife. It provides you with lots of different options of things to do, and you pick the bits that you really like. But one of the criticisms, I suppose, that we see quite a lot is that best practice, by definition, is a lagging indicator. It represents what has been done, and it has been successful in some situations in the past, but that in a constantly changing and volatile, uncertain world, all those kind of things, it isn't always a guarantee that it's going to work in future. So I think we should be cautious as to how we approach best practice, but having said that, it does still represent normally what is stuff that works, that people have used, it's proven, it's beneficial. I don't take the view that we should just ignore it because it's only what's going on in the past at all, but we just need to be viewing it with a little bit of a pinch of salt and saying, right, what's going forward. And it's funny because the comparison with we just had actually on, and we're talking about ITIL 4, and we've been talking about the service desk certification standard and process. And I would say that ITIL has always been a lagging indicator because it's always been looking at bringing experience in until ITIL 4, because I think ITIL 4, we definitely did try to look forward. We definitely did try to use the opportunity to, yes, okay, represent what has happened and what's been successful, but also to say, right, well, this is where we could go. In SDC, the standard there, I think the approach to that, and having been part of both teams, it has been slightly different in the sense that, yes, we've taken on good practice from the past, but I think we've also thought of the standard as being where we'd like to see things going based on the experience that we've had. So I think best practice models and standards are definitely becoming more forward-looking than they have been in the past, and we should use them appropriately and not expect them to tell us how to do everything in our life and work.
Does anybody want to add to that, Simone or Lynne?
I'd just like to say that as someone who's been around in this industry since the very, very early days of help desk, because we didn't have any models, there was no such thing as good practice, let alone best practice. We were making it up as we went along. It was all trial and error. And this is what best practice gives us. You got a new manager coming in to manage a service desk. Now they don't have to wait to get experience. They've got that body of experience, and that's what these best practice standards are. They're a body of experience. And in true ITIL 4 fashion, start where you are. Well, where am I? Compare myself to that experience with the industry, and that's going to give me my initial direction, my initial path to improvement. So it's hugely beneficial to people coming new into these kind of roles, because they don't have to wait to get experience. There's a body experience for them to access.
I must admit, that's probably one of the best things about having them in place. You know, one of the first things from a military perspective is, you know, when you come into a new unit, was always, you know, okay, what's the SOPs? What are our standard operating procedures? What have I got that I, you know, already going to peg off? Because it's the first thing that you are looking for. What do I do? How do I do it? But interestingly, I've always found whenever I've talked about best practice, because there was always this thing about good practice versus best practice, and, you know, what do those terms actually mean? And for me, the way I explain it is just best practice is just the best way we know how now. And as Barclay has said, it's always going to evolve. And I do agree. I think a lot of the frameworks are pulling in a little more of that forward looking, but also too, I think what we're seeing now with, you know, version 8 with the with what we have here in the framework and the certification, as well as what's happening in IDLE. So for example, what I've been looking at in the high velocity IT when I was contributing to that book was the behaviors. You know, we're looking more now at the, it's not just about this process, we're actually looking at the behaviors that we're wanting, or how do we ask the questions to garner those right behaviors, and the ethics involved, both from human and from a technology perspective. So, you know, for me, best practice is always that it's what we do now, but it's also that evolving, what are the sorts of questions, what am I looking at, how can I look forward? So it gives us guidance on how to move forward as much as what we can do now.
It's really interesting. I mean, there's just a lot that's sort of happened obviously over the last couple of years, isn't it? Without going into the usual stuff around COVID, but also when we look at technology changes as well, and what sort of best practice could look like. I mean, we'll come on to maybe some of those questions a little bit later on what that means. I mean, for example, now, you know, if we look at that poll, that snapshot poll about enterprise service management, you know, it was, I don't think without COVID that would have been such of a big topic that sort of, you know, change where it was in the 1 to 10 of everything, where it is now and where it was then. So it's really interesting to see sort of what that means to organizations in how they adopt what they think about as practice, and how they make those practices their best practice, or practices that can be shared across a community that becomes everybody's best practice. So it's very interesting time. I think it's a really exciting time actually. To be in sort of service desk and IT service management. If we look at the service desk, the global best practice standard, right? And you've already mentioned it. We've heard a lot today. I've always positioned the document as a standalone document, rather than, you know, the whole thing of the process around it, the program. What do you think when we look at something like that? So we talk about ITIL books, we talk about stuff that people can read and consume. What is the point of something like the Service Desk Global Best Practice Standard? What value does it drive as a standalone document? How would somebody consume and use that? Not just as actually was mentioning on a couple of guys about just a blank sort of piece of paper, some writing. What's the value in a document like that, guys? And again, Lynne, maybe.
One that I see it again is that the value is that you can measure yourself against something. So any service desk can go and get that standard, download it, and if they want to answer that question, how good are we? Not just how good are we in our organization by our organization's measures, how do we stack up with the rest of the service desk and support industry? How do we know we're good? And it helps them answer that question, because instead of having to find other organizations to go and try and compare themselves with, where maybe there's a lot of disparity about how you run. I mean, we've had 2 people on from the NHS, both in foundation trusts, but actually depending on where your trust is and how it operates can be vastly different. So you don't have to find commonality. What you do is you can download that standard and go, okay, let's see how many of these things, excuse me, we actually do or we have in place. And again, it's that place to start. Maybe we're not as good as we think we are. Because if this is what best practice within the industry is, maybe we're at the lower end. And it gives people that place to start. So it's a self-benchmarking tool at the very least. It allows you to say, how good are we?
Yeah, thank you. And does anybody want to add? I know it's a bit of an obvious question because we've heard a lot about it today, but I just wanted your views on using it as a standalone. Does anybody want to add to that, or have we pretty much done the sort of what it is as a standalone? Anybody want to add to that?
I think, I mean,
my experience. Oh, sorry, Barclay. I was going to say my experience of using a document as a standalone like this, you know, from the perspective of coming in as a new service desk manager, or even if I've been there for a while, things can get a bit staid. The benchmarking is a really important point that Lynne makes, because we get the great reports every year that SDI produces, and it's really good to understand what's sort of going on in the industry. But really, in the end game, we're just trying to be the best of who we are. And so it's really important to be benchmarking against yourself and your own objectives and what those gaps are. And the thing I find about the standalone and using it as that is it reminds me of maybe areas I hadn't considered before, or maybe topics that are coming up in the C-suite meetings, or maybe, you know, things that are, I have this knowledge here that allows me to enter into certain conversations that maybe I hadn't been able to access before. So I think as a standalone, from that self-benchmarking and who am I now and where do we want to be and what do we want to become, enables us to have those conversations.
I was just going to add to that, and I really take those points from both Lynne and Simone, that I think it, you know, specifically this one as well is really a great guide for people in the service desk manager or management role, to help them, you know, get to a level of equity, balance with other teams, because I think it's probably come up a few times today, but you know, the idea of this, when you actually do the benchmarking, when you do the certification, is that although it's centered on the service desk, it also requires the rest of the organization to engage. So, you know, I mean, whether or not you do the certification, actually, it's a point of reference that says, well, yes, here's all the things that we should be doing, and there's new stuff, and it's refreshed every few years and so on. But you know, when it comes to this, we can't do this on our own. We need collaboration from you guys as well. So there's some very good specific elements of this particular standard, and the others that are like it, that help help just to get the service desk awareness and position in the organization clarified.
I think that position in the organization, that's a key one. And this standard on its own is very much an enabler of the conversations more broadly across IT about how do we work as one IT team. Let's get away from these silos. Increasingly, I'm finding when I'm interacting with IT operations managers and the people responsible for the end-to-end support operation, you know, we start by looking at what's best practice in terms of managing the service desk, and they soon realize that actually I need all my teams operating the same way, because if I can get them all operating and being managed the same way, it's that much easier for us to join everything up. So, you know, it's starting to have that greater benefit, which is where the enterprise service management link has come from, because having got that in IT, the rest of the business is going, wow, how did you do this? Can you show us how to do that? And COVID has been the great accelerator for that.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to ask. We just didn't have enough time, but I was going to ask about the catalysts of COVID in relation to some of that. And certainly, when I've been speaking to organisations, some of the organisations, what they've put in place, especially in public sector, have been crazy. They would have never said themselves, we never would have looked at this without COVID. It would have been another 2 years down the road for us to look anywhere near this. So it's very incredible times actually. So we covered off today. What have we heard today? I think when we talk about synergies, we've heard about customer journey mapping. There's been a lot of that, profiles, personas, customer segmentation. We've heard about collaboration. We've heard about communication as well. User experience forums, huddles, people actually asking from other areas in the business to come and join them, to have a chat, which I know it's something simple, but so powerful. And we've also heard a lot from the questions have been very much related to customer surveys, around engagement with customers, about returns, about what should I put in there? What type of question should I put in there? And also obviously performance metrics as well, about measuring the narrative, the value, driving CSI. So those are all the key things I think we've seen. So if we condense your experiences, right, into one single question with a whole host of million answers, what makes a brilliant service desk? Barclay.
Okay, I used
Simple answer.
I still do have. In just how long have I got? Well, there's a few things. I mean, I have a slide that I've used for ages on this, and it includes the picture of a what's it called again? The main ship of the fleet, the
Flagship.
Flagship. That's the one. Yeah, thank you, Lynne. I need some mental support. So the flagship represents the Navy. It represents the fleet. It's the point at which people go, well, that the sort of touchstone is to say what kind of quality it is, what it looks like, how it operates. And I think that, to me, kind of encapsulates it. It should be an area that's well known and respected across the organization. It very often is that it's one area that talks to a whole organization. It should have, good levels of customer satisfaction and all those good employee satisfaction. But in particular, it should be clear as to what it's there to do, and that might sound obvious, but what type of desk is it? Is it primarily there to just to receive issues, or is it one that really is going to be focusing on resolving as many of them as possible? And I think we all know that that's a goal where the more that we can resolve, the faster it gets done for the customer, and so on, and very often more cost effectively. I think also a big one is about the status of it, the way that people view it. So a really good service desk, you'll just find that people go, yes, they're good people, they understand us, they're empathetic, they're technical, they're capable, they get things done quickly. So it's that whole thing of it's being able to establish itself at the right level in the organization. And the one that is always quite challenging is it is actually an aspirational place to work, so that people look at it and go, yeah, I'd really like to work in that team, I'd really want to be part of that team, because it's about quality. But any kind of quality is about matching up with the requirements. So as long as, you can have a very good log and pass service desk, as long as it's well defined that that's what it does it very efficiently, and so on. I'd say that a brilliant service desk should be one that gets things fixed as quickly and with a minimum amount of touch, or escalation, with great personal experience of doing that, and as quickly as possible. So there's lots of different things, but being clear of what the objectives are and being supported and respected across the organization, that's a brilliant service desk.
Thank you, Barclay. Maybe Lynne?
There are so many flavors of what makes a good service desk, because as Barclay said, it's like, what is the service desk there to do? But for me, there's two things. One is passion. You see the best service desks, they have a passion for what they do. They are invested personally, and as a team, they're invested in what they do. They act as the voice, the champion of the customer within IT, and they act as the voice of IT to the customer, and they're valued because they're very good at doing that. But the thing that really makes a difference to me, it's passion, that they're passionately invested in doing the very best for their business. This is why we've had two people from the NHS here today, because boy, when you go into the NHS, they are intimately connected to the success of their organization. They know exactly how what they do impacts on patient care. And since they're all usually working locally, they know that that patient care could be for their families, their friends. They're so intimately connected to it. And that's what makes a great service desk, that intimate connection with what the business does.
Yeah, Simone?
Yeah, the passion is definitely part of it. And I think the passion has to be connected very strongly to the purpose. So I think that understanding or being part of or being engaged in as a core person with the purpose of what they're doing is that that winning combination for me. A lot of the service desks that I've worked with over the years, the ones that I've been part of, not just doing the consulting work with, has been that we are there to protect and to serve, and not be a servant. And I think that has been a very big mind shift over the time, that to do that is to be part of the purpose of the organization, not just what the service desk does. It's not about what we do per se, but it's how we connect to that passion and purpose in what we do.
And it's interesting. I've done some sort of research into terminology. I mean, how words are played out, I suppose, in organizations in certain ways. The service, you're right. I mean, the word service itself it's got a controversial word if you look back far enough, and how that's played out as what an end user expects from a service, and how somebody who delivers the service is expected to act. It's very, very interesting. I've thrown up some words there, and that's from another slide deck, which talks about the same subject, and some of the words on there are just, it's not contrived at all. It's just up there. And as you can see in there, these are some of the key words we've seen today: purpose, meaning, communication, accountability, autonomy. We've heard that. We haven't heard altruistic today. And I'm a big believer in, because I think it comes back to that passion thing that you were talking about, Lynne. It's really under cultures. It's about, I think, how organizations recruit to build cultures. Altruism in service management, guys. Is that a thing? Do you think are we moving towards a more altruistic sort of approach? Because the question I had for you, Barclay, about that sort of the stuff you said about fixing stuff as quickly as they can, limited touch points, all that. That's a lot about undoing the past, isn't it? That's a lot about undoing the past, the last 30 years of how we've sort of created service management, and what best practice used to be and what it is now. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have to look forward, of course. The majority of desks are still doing the things that we're talking about. Altruism is about looking out for other people and focusing on their needs. So that makes perfect sense. I don't see that as being necessarily new to good service desks, but to many that are run on a kind of functional or minimum cost basis, then that will be a challenge. And we've all had bad experiences where the focus of the operation has been to fulfill some pointless SLA, or to do that at the minimum cost. So I think altruistic is a good word there, because it's about working towards the needs of others, and making sure that actually happens. And that goes with the other concepts that have been raised about passion and creativity in particular. I like things like integrity and accountability there as well, because it is, again, in many cases they are there as the guardians of the service, whatever that is. And that those of us who've worked in IT operations for a long time will know that when we started out with that, it was principally to protect the the knowledge assets of the organization, and I don't see that as having disappeared. I see where that sits and how it's managed and so on is changing. I think the important bit is that we now can focus on the human interaction part of it more. The more automation that we use, the more time we've got to be creative and innovative, and to use the tools to do that. But ultimately, it does come down to that person-to-person interaction, the communication, you know, sending and receiving information and showing. And I think in Akshay's slides there was that thing about, you know, empathy and passing it over, and do we show that we understand, and that's important. In a lot of cases, technical people don't kind of get that. They think that just sending stuff out is all we need to do, whereas actually good altruistic people, and those that, you know, that thrive on good human communications, know that not only do I need to send the message out, I need to check that it's being received, and vice versa. So there's a lot there, I think. I mean, to me, a lot of these things are, you know, developments and maturity as much as brand new ideas. But that's probably because I'm just getting a bit old. But I mean, I do think that we can focus now more on, you know, those aspects, whereas in the past we've been too busy resetting passwords and running around daft. So you know, the focus now must be on doing those things well, rather than just, you know, being functional and operational.
Anybody would add to that?
I think as well, we started talking about customer experience rather than customer satisfaction, and that's where that really comes to the fore, because good processes and procedures and tools and technologies will get you so far, but it really only gets you as far as most customers just expect. The bit where we make a difference, the bit where we can really impact the customer experience, is with our people at interactions. And trust, you know, you talk about altruism, but the foundation of that is trust. The foundation of every relationship is trust. And that's what customers need to do. They need to trust their service desk to act in their best interest. Whether the service desk fixes it or the service desk gets it fixed is kind of immaterial. That trust and that focus on, we've got to keep people working to the highest possible level so the business can succeed. And as Barclay says, all of these new developments are just helping us be able to spend more time understanding customers' needs so that we can actually fulfill them better, make sure they've got what they need when they need it, and they're not always waiting for us to deliver things that they need to keep the business functioning. And that's something COVID has highlighted as well, the fact that they now realize exactly how dependent they are on IT and how key the service desk is into ensuring that they can keep functioning under any circumstance.
Anything to add to that?
I would put a caveat. Yeah, I would put a caveat around the word altruistic. You know, there are many that are in, you know, have been in those frontline positions, and of course altruism is also about being, you know, self-sacrificing, self-denying. So I would put a caveat around understanding the nuance or how we apply altruism to make sure that we are balancing the needs, because it is about co-creating that value, that there are two people in this relationship when they're having that conversation on the service desk. It's not just one person. So yes, I like altruism. I do believe very much in it, but there has to be a well-being and mental health balance, as well as a financial balance and all of those sorts of things that we need to take into account, which is one of the reasons I think the standards are so good, because we need to balance all those aspects in order to gain what we think is, you know, what we believe is the best outcome for all involved. So balance that understanding of, it's not just about complete self-sacrifice and I'm just going to, you know, bleed everything out to get this done. It's about how can we work together to make this happen and to get the best outcome.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because it's all sort of philosophical, I suppose, around how we term and think about that. Because you're right. I mean, you know, I'm taking from what Barclay said around the trust. I think you were the first one to mention the conversation. So, you know, is best practice pretty much just building trust amongst any stakeholder in an organization, and everything else are just outcomes. I've been sort of reading a lot recently and trying to translate stoicism. Lynne has got a Winnie the Pooh stoic story, I think, and I've been reading a lot recently about stoicism and stoicism in an approach to delivering a service. And I think there's a lot in that. There's a lot in that around sort of taking ownership and accountability. And I think you're right about balancing that the end result of altruism. The far right altruists and the sort of middle ground altruism thing. I think that's but interesting. It's very interesting, and again, it's a cultural mental thing, I think, around what we think we do in IT, how we manage and how we measure, and what we're trying to do as an outcome, and how that's perceived by the people who sort of consume the outcomes. Let's talk about the audit, guys. Let's talk about the auditors, right? From an audit perspective, you guys go in there, you look at organizations, you talk to organizations. We've heard a few people already talk about that, and the value of the auditor. Yeah, and I think certainly from a certification program, when we talk about pairing an auditor with an organization, it's about that. It's about the value of that relationship. And I just want to maybe ask, what do you expect as an auditor from an organization? What are auditors looking for? It's not just a black and white thing, is it? Or is it that? Is it a black and white thing? What are you looking for? What is an auditor's perspective? What are you looking for from an organization that you audit? And we'll start with Lynne.
When I go into an organisation first time, when we do those pre-assessments, that's very much about building relationships, getting to know the organisation in a fair amount of detail, them getting to know the standards, them getting to know you as an auditor. There's an awful lot about building relationships at those very early stages. At that stage, what I'm looking for is them to be open-minded, for them to be honest and transparent, because we're not going to get anywhere if those things aren't there. You build on that over the years, because you're embarking on what can be a 4, 5, sometimes 6-year relationship. So it starts with establishing that foundation of trust, respect, openness and transparency. And that to me is the key. If they're not going to do that, then it becomes very difficult to affect change. It becomes very difficult to help them improve. And it can become, it was interesting that a couple of our speakers today talked about it not being a tick box exercise. And if that foundation of trust doesn't get established, if they're not open and transparent, that's exactly what it becomes. And then they don't derive the value that they're looking for. They don't grow and develop. And it all starts at that very early stage.
And we did learn earlier that you don't take bribes, Lynne. I think Jim's mentioned you don't, which I'm amazed at, because when I was auditing, I was taking bribes all day long. It was brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant.
As long as I keep me fed and watered, I'll be a kind, helpful auditor. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Simone, what do you think about that from an auditor's perspective?
I like that too. Just keep me fed and audited, please. And please give me a desk that actually has natural light. I don't wish to actually be down in the dungeon with all the files and the boxes and having to find stuff myself, which that is one of the issues that can occur. It ends up like whenever it looks like a legal courtroom where the other side is just saying, here's all the paperwork and drown you in it. That's not helpful at all. So definitely visibility and honesty, but I think part of that up front in that relationship is from that trust perspective, you've asked us to come in and have a look at how can we help you be better? How can we make you more well than you are? So it's not about coming in and nitpicking and telling you you're wrong at this and you're wrong at that. It's not about that. So I think the role of an auditor really up front, we can also be a mentor and a coach as we move through this. In a big way, and remembering too that from an auditor's perspective, it's not like the old days where it's okay, I've got my folder and I'm just going tick tick tick, and the glasses are down on the nose and I'm inspecting. It's not about being an inspector from that perspective. It's actually more about being a detective. It's like trying to solve the puzzle of what we can do. So if it means that you need us, there's agreements around non-disclosures. We have these other compliance and legal sides of things that actually assist in that trust mechanism as well. And that if we're there to actually be of benefit, not the other way. So I think that pre-assessment, understanding those things, what is their reason for having an audit? That's the other thing that I really focus on. because sometimes the reason has been, oh, look, I've been telling them this for years and they won't believe me. We just need an external person, you know, professional to say, look, it really is true. Or are we really actually wanting to do something with this once you have that truth? So for, you know, upfront for me, that's the beginnings of getting into the, you know, getting into all the other good stuff that we can do.
Good.
Yeah,
Barclay,
I would support all that, and I mean, just as Lynne's saying, they have some very long relationships. I've one that's over 10 years now, and I think that part of that is about being, you know, being able to create that relationship where you know, it is like a personal relationship where, you know, if your friends can't tell you, then nobody can. So, you know, you want to build that kind of level of trust that you are, you know, you're providing good feedback to them. I'm really pleased to hear people saying earlier that they don't see it as a tick box exercise, because I mean, I think that's really important as a sort of distinction in the SDI approach, which is to say, you know, we are subject matter experts. We're not professional auditors doing this and just following a, you know, we're there to try and add value and add, you know, positive help. Doesn't mean to say we're not, you know, thorough and you know, we'll call something out if we see it, but that's part of what we're there to do. I just like to try and make it as much as possible a conversation and enjoyable as much as it can be when you're auditing processes. But I always say that discussion is a challenging one, even more so than the management information one. The process one is you know, is a good hour and a bit that is intense. But I always find it really interesting when people start really then, you know, somebody goes, yes, we have got this process, and somebody else goes, well, yeah, but it doesn't quite work that way. And that to me shows that the organization, you know, that we've got the trust that they can actually have the conversation in front of me as the auditor. And it doesn't mean I'm going to just, you know, red pen through everything and that's it, you know, failure. It actually means that I'm going to contribute to it as well, and I'm going to make some suggestions and so on. As somebody else said, use the auditor. I think that was a really good point as well. You know, the auditor's there to be your a source of information, free consultancy, whatever you want. It's not free, but I mean, just being a very good value consultancy, you know, as part of this process.
It is, and I go back to that point around, you know, trying to make sure that when we do fit an auditor with an organization, we see it as a long-term thing. It is a partnership. The value that we're adding is in that relationship and the interpretation of the understanding of the auditor in the environment, and how well the organization can articulate to the auditor and what can be derived from that relationship. And I've certainly seen, well, goodness knows, over the last 7 years, some incredible relationships being built and some incredible value being driven as well by those relationships, which is quite humbling, really, when you see some of that in action and realize how many other organizations just haven't got that sort of foil, you know, and are still stuck in there. And I think we'll move on to that, actually. VUCA is a very popular term. It's been popular for a while. First off, so for our listeners, if you've not heard it, it's VUCA, VUCA. Simone, I'm going to ask you to define or give us an indication of what VUCA means, if that's okay.
Well, it's actually quite a very old term. Originally came from the US military way back in the 50s, and the acronym just stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which are states of being, if you like. They are contexts in which things live or occur, or what goes on around us. And so living in a my husband always says that my family is a VUCA world all of its own. So that's what happens when with in-laws and conversations like that. So it's really quite an interesting thing. I really enjoy working with the understanding of the VUCA context. And for me, the one thing that I'm looking to do is people to understand the flip side. you know, I love geology. My father used to live only 30 miles from a volcano at one point, and you know, I love. I've stood on volcanoes myself, and so volatility for me is really can be a very exciting and could be chaos, but that's the whole point of if it's all going to go that way, it's like, what have I got? What can I do? How do I work with that? So for me, volatility, the flip side for that is also a vibrancy. And that is something I see in service desks a lot, you know, when things don't quite work the way that is expected, that what is the vibrancy that we bring to that volatility. The other one for uncertainty, I'm looking for what's unreal. Okay, I don't know what's going to happen, but wow, this is so unreal to me. But unreal can also be, wow, we've got this opportunity to really do something. So even with the uncertainty, it's the opportunity to learn something new. When something's really complex, you know, it can just feel crazy. But I want people to be crazy because that's the passion side of it. People often say when you're excited about something, you get really passionate and that you're mad. Well, mad for me or being crazy for me is about making a difference. So when something's really complex, you can make a difference even in one small part, which can lead us bringing it back into being a little less complicated and easier. So yes, get crazy about complexity and understanding that. And when things are ambiguous and it's like that grey area, well, do you know, the reality is we live in the grey a lot. There's not a lot of black and white in certain things. So in that ambiguity, I'm looking for, wow, what's astounding? What's really going to, you know, wake things up? When I'm in an ambiguous state, what's going to astound me? What's the kind of communication that we can bring to it, or some unique thought or some creative action that we can be taken to turn it from being ambiguous to astounding. So VUCA for me is very exciting.
That's cool. Thank you for that. That's just a really good explanation, actually. So taking that into consideration when we're talking about best practice, when we're talking about, you know, where some organizations live, some organizations are partnering with an auditor and are having a brilliant time in the program, and things are getting better. There's a structure that they're using that best practice. Some organizations aren't, and I think that move from reactive to proactive is always a big thing, isn't it? That state of chaos, that firefighting. And the move from that state to a less reactive state, you know, more proactive state. What does it take, man? And your experiences as auditors and consultants, what are the key things it takes to move an organization from that reactive VUCA sort of place, chaos, to a place that is more structured, is more proactive, with still some level of reaction there, considering best practice in that, what it means? Yeah, does that make sense? Does that question make sense? What does it take to move from chaotic to slightly less chaotic or proactive? And we can maybe tie this even back to the certification program and the scoring mechanism there. So 2-star is a proactive level, under that is a reactive level. What does it take to move from reactive to proactive? Lynne. Sorry, Lynne.
It needs, and again, here's where the standards come in. And not knowing where we are now, it means we've got to analyze the past. We've got to look at the past in order to learn what we have to change to influence the future. And the standards are great for doing that because, you know, if you're firefighting all the time, you're kind of in the moment, you're just dealing with one chaos after another. And being proactive isn't about eliminating reactivity. It is about predicting the reactive stuff you're going to do and get very good at reacting to it. And then when you're very good at handling that, then you can start looking at performance. So the first step is understanding where we are now and what can we predict? What does the past tell us about things that happen and that we can actually prepare for having to deal with them when they do happen? Because again, problem management is that little bit further on in proactivity. Yeah, it's a bit further on. So it's just about, we know some fires are going to happen. We don't yet have the maturity to be able to stop the fires from occurring. But if we know we're going to have them, we can plan of how we're going to deal with them. And then that means we deal with them more efficiently. They have less impact on the business, takes less of our time, gives us time to look at improving things. So it's looking at the past to learn how we can influence the future. Then when they get to that point where they understand their reactivity and get very good at reacting, that's when they can start moving into that. How do we stop some of this stuff reacting? What's the changes we have to make to stop some of that stuff happening, so we don't have to do the reactive bit? And that gives us more time for planning and strategy and improving tools and processes and technologies, because that path needs the wriggle room. You need enough time to draw breath to think about how you're going to change stuff. And that's the first step.
Barclay?
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I agree with that. I think that the seeing where you are and understanding it and being able to move forward, all these things are completely relevant. I'd put a slightly different aspect on it, which is that, back to the point about VUCA, I think we need to clarify as part of this process, and with that, that understanding, we need to understand the fact that we live in, the context that we live in is much more unpredictable. We can't foresee everything. I think one of the big shifts that has happened, and this is reflected in, a lot of the best practice, and we certainly made a big effort to reflect this in ITIL 4, for example, is the fact that, that there are different states that we might be in, different contexts, and we need to recognize those different contexts. And that might mean, in terms of the difference between technology and people and organization and so on, but probably more importantly, and if you've looked at things like Kinefin, which tries to understand different levels of chaos, or there's a very predictable level where we know what's going to happen and we can do something about it. That's more or less sort of call center environment. There's 10 things that might happen. 99% of them will happen in that way, and the odd one we'll deal with. Service desk environment is much more unpredictable, and if we've built models that expect everything to conform to a sort of one size fits all, the SLA priority matrix, all that kind of stuff, we're going to fail, because it's never going to work. So I mean, I think in terms of thinking about it from the VUCA perspective, and the value that we really add as good service management people, is to just recognize that from day one. And I think this process is very good at that, and getting people to stand back and kind of go, okay, well, we're seeing more data, we understand where we are in terms of our delivery, we understand in terms of relations to our customer and the rest of the organization, the rest of the IT organization, all those things. We have a much more realistic view as to what we can, the things that we can change, the things that we can't change, and all the kind of bits in the middle. I think that's the real value of service management, and good service management people recognize it before they even start. We're in a constantly shifting world, so we've got to be ready for different situations, and things like the guiding principles are there to try and help people. It's one thing saying that, and then on the other hand, an organization has spent years telling people exactly what to do. You can't just shift overnight. You've got to give them a way of saying, well, there's certain criteria where it's okay to do that, and so on.
And I was going to ask actually a question about, is it possible for all organizations to make that positive move? And in your experiences now as auditors, so is it possible for all organizations to come out of that sort of maelstrom? And what stops organizations if not all can? Maybe someone.
Wow, tough question. Yes, I have seen organizations fail. And it's actually a very sad thing to see, but the reasoning behind it is multi-factor, and that can come from not paying attention to certain areas. It might be the people area that they're not paying attention to, and the lack of understanding around the needs for not just upskilling but also reskilling, and which is a huge difference. A lot of people sort of go upskilling, reskilling, they all sort of think, yeah, it's all about training, but they forget that what we're really talking about here is the competency of the organization, the ability of the organization to make these shifts and turns. So, and it's not just about turning on a dime. Some organizations can do that really well, but they're the ones that have successfully understood that they're at a maturity level where, yes, there's still reactivity, they're proactive in other aspects, they're focused around the customer, but from a sustain, not just being able to sustain, but thrive in, in the context that surprise us, still comes back to that human element of being able to be fantastic, terrific problem solvers and great communicators. I still come back to those two core things in a lot of ways when I see what their abilities are like, because even if the technology isn't quite where they wish it would be, even if the processes don't quite meet the need for that particular situation, that human element, their conceptual thinking, cognitive abilities, the skill sets that we provide them, or I see skill sets under that competency we provide them, where they have a toolbox of approaches, methods, techniques, and be able to harness those and bring those together, is what makes the difference to those organizations. As I said, not just to sustain what's going on right now, but being able to thrive in the future.
Good, thank you. We've got probably about 7 minutes left, guys, and I wanted to touch on, what you're seeing out there now in relation to developing good practice, where we're going. There's a lot happening, isn't there? If you look at tools, if you look at things like, the promise of machine learning, the AI, goodness knows, there's so many so many different narratives out at the minute. I think it's fair to say that doesn't change, though. It's the same we've always had in one shape or another. I just wanted to think about or talk about maybe what you think we could see as developing best practice recently. And Barclay, you were involved. I think I don't know if you guys saw it, but there was an awful lot of back and forth around the DevOps community creating their own incident management sort of protocol, and what that means for traditional IT service management, and how the two maybe work together progressively as organizations develop their technology sort of an infrastructure in a different way. So I'm just interested in what that means for you guys and what maybe you're seeing out there at the minute. So what do we think is evolving good practice, or we should be considering about evolving good practice? And what do you think from a service desk perspective, how will that morph into whatever good practice becomes in an organization? I know that's a huge question to end on, but I'm really interested in what your answers are. Maybe Barclay start with.
It's usually me who asks the long questions. I do see quite a lot of convergence on a number of areas. You mentioned it's IT Revolution incident management approach, that their model came out of that, which there's a lot of really great stuff in, and is useful and interesting. Just missed the opportunity to maybe have some collaboration on that, which is unfortunate, but maybe that will happen. But I think we'll probably see more of that, where there are new versions of things that we might have taken for granted for a while, and the convergence, I think, is happening. Back to the VUCA thing, I think there is more understanding of the need for, if you like, corporate or organizational level governance. And by governance, I don't just mean control. I mean true governance. What are we trying to do as an organization? Are we doing, are we doing those things? And if not, what do we need to do to make sure that we are, and can we show that we're doing it, and there's a value, and does everybody agree, and all these kind of big questions that should be driving what we've had to kind of invent a lot of this stuff ourselves in IT. I think Lynne was saying earlier, we had to make it up in the early days. Yes, we did, and we're still doing that to some extent. I think the areas are all coming together a lot more now, where we talk about things like enterprise service management, we talk about digital transformation. Again, they're different ends of the same thing, changing the way we work, being more efficient and effective, using technology, but also being more human at the same time, and being able to reflect and focus on the areas that we're good at as people. What that means for best practice remains to be seen. I think we probably will see more new flavors of that coming out. I think the focus of how it works and how it's rolled out will continue to evolve. A good friend, colleague, David Cannon, who's in the industry, recently said every model and framework or piece of best practice reflects the time that it was written in. And I think we shouldn't forget, we shouldn't think that anything is written in stone. There are some things that we know that work and they're proven, but there's a certain point where the whole world shifts sufficiently where that just doesn't matter anymore. So we can't take anything for granted in that, and I think we'll continue to see more new ideas, but maybe more rebirths of some things that that don't depend on the legacy of the past. I think the recent sort of acquisition of Axelos through PeopleCert, overall, I think that's, I know a lot of people don't like it in the industry, but I actually think that from the point of view of the overall industry and synergy and getting things working, I think it's a good thing, because we won't have lots of small organizations and barriers rather than a big approach that says PeopleCert, for example, do DevOps and they do SDI and they do all sorts of other things. So ideally those things will converge more, but we need the specificity of things like the SDC standard, because it actually gives people on the ground targetable and manageable things that they can work towards.
That's a good answer. Anybody want to answer that before we close? We've got a few minutes left, guys. Lynne,
just one of the things, just an observation that I wanted to make, which is not about the standards specifically, but taking that more holistic view, because a lot of inquiries we've been getting certainly this year have been a renewed interest in customer service skills and customer communication skills. Some of those things that took a bit of a back seat as technology, and particularly around AI, was kind of taking traction. And again, I think it's come out of what's happened over the past 2 years, and that people have suddenly realized that the differentiator is in that personal service, and there's a renewed interest. We're getting lots and lots of inquiries about that kind of thing, and I actually think that's where something, as Barclay said, something that's more holistic, like the SDC standards, starts to come to the fore. And maybe we'll have to see that that has to adapt and focus more on how you deliver a customer experience rather than what are the components in running a successful service desk.
Simone?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what David Cannon has said. It's definitely a reflection of our times, and I think whenever we're looking at it, with an organization at what's going on for them, we are looking at its shape, we're looking at its context, and in the times that it happens to be living, and so I think having other frameworks develop or new ones come out, or I guess it's reshaping, it might be morphing into something else. I think sometimes it's this is taking something that existed and repurposing it for something that we didn't even realize that it might be able to do. And that's a really important aspect of understanding and taking what we have and being able to confidently bounce forward. It's not a new normal. It's like going, well, what's next? And being able to do the what's next. And I wholeheartedly agree that the SDC and the standards that are there give us something practical to hold on to if we feel like we've been pulled into a maelstrom of, so I think it gives us something very practical to move forward with, and gives us the wherewithal to be able to create the new shapes that we're looking for. Because, I mean, the way the organization looks is the business culture is a reflection of the society context, and at the heart of understanding that change in the culture is the reflection of the changes within the people.
Great, really great. Well, that's pretty much on time. I think it's been a fantastic day. I love doing these. I wish you could do these every day, to be honest. I do. It's better than working, isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it?
Well, we talk for a living, so we're not the people to ask.
True. That's true. But it's been a brilliant day, a really brilliant day, guys. And I'm sure we've got a lot of questions that we're going to get back to the guys who joined us today, our listeners, with answers to from probably a number of sources, including you. I'm sure we'll shoot a few questions over at some point. So thank you for joining today. It's been a pleasure. Hope to see you very soon, maybe in 3D soon. You never know. Maybe in 3D if we're lucky. So I'm going to switch my camera off, which I'm sure a lot of people will be thankful for. And we'll catch up very soon. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.